Hello, hello.
Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My warm congratulations to the Institute on its 45th anniversary or 45th anniversary of its conference and award ceremony. Honorable Minister of Industry, Trade and Investments, the President and Vice President, the Registrar, and all the eminent members of the Institute, chartered secretaries, and administrators of Nigeria, the highly intellectual panel of discussants, distinguished audience. I am indeed thankful for the rare privilege of addressing a gathering as august as this, and most importantly, the opportunity to speak to the topic, African Continental Free Trade Area, after fresh frontier for a charter secretary / governance professional. You will observe from my presentation on the screen that, okay, firstly, this presentation is supposed to be made by Mr. Hassan Balogun, but he delegated to me. So part of the challenges of delegation sometimes is actually misrepresentation. So instead of treating a sub-theme, you will see that my presentation is on the major theme of the conference. So you pardon me to address this, as that's what I prepared for. So to the topic, Africa Continental Free Trade Area, after. I have noted that the conception and the ongoing execution obligations of AFTA are deliberate and audacious efforts at expanding the frontiers of commerce, diversity, and prosperity across the African continent. In seeking to deepen the economic integration of Africans by creating a single continental market, business, people, and investments, the AFTA is indeed a testament to the power of cooperation and a shared vision. Part of the motivation behind the drafting of the AFTA agreements is actually because of the fact that intra-Africa trade has been observed to be very, very low. As a matter of fact, the highest Africans have traded among themselves has only been 20%, and that is as far back as 2016. So it was therefore a welcome development when in March 2018, 3 separate agreements were signed. One, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the Kigali Declaration, and thirdly, the Protocol of Free Movement of Persons. These 3 agreements can work to reduce bureaucracy, harmonize regulations, and avoid protectionism. It will also expand inter-African trade through better harmonization and coordination of rules across Africa. The potentials for Africa is that there will be a creation of a very massive market encompassing 55 member states, 55 countries, and a people as many as 1.2 billion. I have noted the strategic objective of AFTA. And then I proceeded to the second subtopic, the Charter Secretary, Governance Professional, from disdain to noble. The position and status of the Company Secretary are progressively changed for the better through legislative and judicial interventions. The remarkable transition of mindsets that sees company secretaries are mere note takers to a current conception of them as a vital part of companies' management and advocates for efficient governance structures for companies is highly commendable. The dicta of both Lord Escher, Master of Rules, and Lord Denny, Master of Rules, in 1887 and 1971 are very, very key in this regard. They allowed evidence of the fortunate transition. In the case of Barnard Towers and South London tramways, Lord Esher said, a secretary is a mere servant. His position is that he has to do what he is told, and no person can assume that he has any authority to represent anything at all, nor can anyone assume that statements made by him are necessary to be accepted as trustworthy without further inquiry. I want us to contrast this with the subsequent position of Lord Denning, MR, in 1971, in the case of Panorama Development, Guildford Limited, and Fidelis Furnishing Fabrics, when he said, a company secretary is a much more important person nowadays than he was in 1887. This appears not only in the Modern Companies Act, but also by the role which he plays in the day-to-day business of companies. He regularly makes representation on behalf of the company and enters into contract on its behalf, which come within the day-to-day running of the company's business. All such matters now come within the ostensible authority of a company secretary. As a former vestige of the British Empire, Nigeria unfortunately also shared that conception that the company secretary was just a mere note taker and not an important part of a company. But that eventually changed when in 1986, the court decided that the company secretary is indeed a high-ranking officer in the company setup and is indeed part of the management of the company. So the emphasis, shifted from merely looking at a company secretary or governance professional as a mere note taker to someone of importance that is part of management of a company. So today, the company secretary holds a duty to the management, to the board of directors, to shareholders of the company. He has statutory responsibilities of corporate governance, board development, board and committee processes, communication with stakeholders, as well as reporting and disclosure obligations. So to AFTA and the opportunities, that is therein. So this portion is titled Transnational Company Secretarial Services, Fresh Frontier for Practitioners under the AFTA. I noted that one of the critical protocols of the AFTA is the Trade in Services Protocol. Though still in embryo and subject to future negotiation, the expectation is that professionals and business services, such as legal, accounting, and company secretarial / corporate governance practitioners, will exchange their services for value across the African borders. Under Article 7 and 8 of the AFTA agreement, all countries are to participate in the phase 2 negotiations. The import of this is that the protocols on trade in services is not yet enforceable. It's not even available at the moment. It's still subject of future negotiation. It's part of the phase 2 steps that will come after the signing of the AFTA agreement. So the AU team, the African Union team, are currently studying the functional patterns adopted by the World Trade Organization's General Agreement on Trade in Services to understand that member states. Upon completion and negotiation of accords, all those restrictions in terms of legal regimes and cultural, economic, political, and religious diversities, they are. So even before the establishment of the World Trade Organization, and while we await negotiations on trade in services, by the AU team under the act, and identified practices that have already preceded these, that are very, very important for us to look at and for us to emulate. I noted that in France, as far back as the 1970s, lawyers, I'm using lawyers as an example because at the moment, there is no comparative example to adopt. So as far back as the 1970s, lawyers from America and the UK were allowed into France, particularly in Paris, to practice. They were deemed, then they were called Council Juridique International. They were called International Legal Advisors, constituted by an unregulated body of foreign lawyers, distinct from the regulated court lawyers called the advocates. While lawyers in France were regarded as advocates, the French government allowed persons who were not called to the French bar to practice as foreigners in Paris. And they were then called international lawyers, regarded, and they were not subjected to the same rules as the French lawyers. A similar thing was actually practiced in New York. As a matter of fact, foreign lawyers were admitted and were also regarded as legal consultants. Yeah, I noted that the New York State Legislature permitted such lawyers as legal consultants without examination and without regard to citizenship. The only condition is that such a person must have been admitted to practice in a foreign country as an attorney or as a counselor. So similar practice was also available within the EU around 1977. That members of EU, so the EU there was the EU Directive on Lawyers' Establishment Rights, 1998, which facilitated the practice of the profession of lawyers on a permanent basis in a member state other than the state in which the qualification is obtained. The same thing was also practiced within the NAFTA sub-region, that's the North American Free Trade Agreement. Persons under that, within that region, such as Mexico, Canada, United States, were allowed to, persons like that were allowed to, practice transnationally across borders. Again, we move to Asia. The Chinese government in 1992 had a similar thing by allowing foreign law firms to establish representative offices in some of their cities in Beijing and Shanghai. So lawyers from Britain, from Japan, Germany, and Australia were allowed to set up law firms in both Beijing and Shanghai. So thus, in discussing the typologies of globalization of law firms operating outside their national boundaries, I've quoted a number of, forerunners, researchers in this regard. For Cambridge, Beaverstock, Museo, and Taylor identified the kind of style in which lawyers practice across borders. So what some of them they identify that in some cases, some law organically develop in cross-border countries. In other cases, they form alliances and partnerships. A common example is a law firm in Lekki. I don't want to market them by mentioning the name. They represent a global law firm called DLA Piper. So the DLA Piper Africa, they are practically the representative of that law firm in Nigeria. So when you commonly see their letterhead, they put boldly DLA Piper, as if the name of the firm itself is actually DLA Piper. And in actual fact, DLA Piper as a law firm is not called to the Nigerian bar. The law firm that is called, the practitioners that are operating there are just the people called to the Nigerian bar. So you also have affiliations and networking. People network and have affiliation with those with different law firms across the world. Some of these things actually also play out when you have law firms have big multinational transactions. In most cases, when you have loan syndications that involve borrowing from both local and international fund providers, either banks or the IFC and all that, more often than not, you have international law firms like White and Case. A number of them prepare and document make the loan documentation as regard the foreign element of it, and you have the Nigerian partners also document as it relates to the local flavor of that transaction. Then you also have outsourcing of briefs, franchising of local firm. So in my conclusion, I said my positive proposition is that company secretarial and governance professionals can toe the same courses highlighted above to advance their international ambitions. Companies, as ICSAN, as Institute of Professionals, can also have strategic alliances with sister or related institutes across Africa and begin to see how those collaborations can allow multinational practice. Then I move to the constraints. Of the constraint that you have, we're likely to have under the after, is that I said there are no limitations or restrictions on market access to the service industry in Nigeria, except professional qualification requirements. I went further to say that this professional qualification requirement constitutes in one breath a limiting factor for foreigners, and another breath a protectionist shield anchored on and driven by public interest for Nigerians. So what you find in most cases, I recall, I instantiated by recalling the case of Chief Adeola against Honorable Malam. This particular you recall that Chief Adeola then was charged with criminal offenses. And in defending himself, he decided to get a foreign lawyer, a British lawyer. And then what came up before the court for interpretation was his rights under the 1960 Constitution to be defended by a legal practitioner of his choice. So a legal practitioner of his choice was a British lawyer. So the court then decided that it's impossible for him, by virtue of, it's impossible for that lawyer, having not been called to the Nigerian bar, to come into Nigeria to practice. The custom agencies had disallowed the lawyer from coming in. So this issue particularly highlighted the fact that there are constraints to the practice, allowing persons who are not duly qualified, who do not meet legal or regulatory requirements set by regulators in Nigeria to come in and practice. While Nigerians have had a lot of privilege in, leaving the country to practice in other countries. You look at how Nigeria, a lot of Nigerians have gone to Gambia to develop their legal system. As a matter of fact, the Gambian army was actually developed by Nigerians. Nigeria constituted a larger part of their judiciary. I remember Justice Aguda was one time the CJ of the Gambian judiciary. Even the current person or the last person was also a Nigerian. So we've been exporting a lot of, even before the after agreement, Nigerians have had the privilege of dominating trade in services across Africa. So after coming in, will only allow us to consolidate, to do more, will give us a better license, to do that, to conquer Africa and also conquer the world in more like. In conclusion, I said, as professionals that will be part of the eventual beneficiaries of a liberalized structure for trade services in Africa, let me admonish that ICSAN, as an institute, is at liberty to make formal presentations to guide the AU team and the Nigerian government on the best structural and legal templates that can be adopted to further its multinational drive. Thank you very much for your audience.